Have you dealt with your shadow? How can working with your shadow save you? I saw a tweet the other day. It said, make sure you love yourself because you're going to spend the rest of your life with you. Lilith is a natal chart placement and myth close to me. And many people comment on my Lilith tattoo I have right on my wrist, so it's very visible, especially even if I'm wearing long sleeve shirts. My shirt sleeve will peel back a little bit and people can see my Lilith tattoo. And for me, it symbolizes always being willing to work with your shadow self. Because when you ignore your shadow self, it comes out in, I want to take the leap and use the word evil ways. Lilith represents your inherited shadow self. Heavy, not bad. I wouldn't say bad. I would say heavy. People get those things confused, and if you read about Lilith online, you're going to see a malign portrait of what some people would call a goddess and some people would call a demon. But it all has to do with power if you look at the myth closely, with parity. And fighting for these things can be scary, especially if you already have power and you don't want others to have parity. In 1918, astrologers were looking at a second moon near the Earth called the dark moon. But Black Moon Lilith is really just a point in the moon's orbit, not a body in the sky. So understanding and finding Lilith's position in your natal chart is important, and it can help you become aware of your dark side. You can stop being so self-defeating, or you can stop using unhealthy behaviors to cover up what's in your shadow that you don't want to face. Lilith represents your part of life where a very femme side plays a strong role. So when I say femme, I'm talking about the historically, or should I say anciently, feminine side. So everyone, like I've mentioned in previous podcasts, holds both masculine and feminine energy. And I've mentioned many times before, even though I would pass as femme on the outside, I would say my personality is quite masculine. I would describe myself as a masculine person. And perhaps I'll get to that in another episode or another random talk. But yes, we both hold both masculine and feminine sides. And femininity can contain nastiness. And maybe you know what I mean before I say it, but it also, it just represents an attitude of creativity, I would say, on the lighter side and not the shadow side. And you will see, and I'll talk about a few people who have Lilith dominant in their charts, but people who have Lilith conjunct their rising or in their first house, they're very much out there and they use femininity to assert themselves in the world. So for instance, I brought her up on the show before, Kim Kardashian has Lilith conjunct her ascendant. And so Lilith and Sagittarius, so Sagittarius are known for body-wise, like in terms of body shape, curviness. So you can see Lilith being conjunct Kim Kardashian's ascendant. It represents her feminine creativity and how she's been fighting and using all of that creativity to establish herself as a brand and develop this big following based on femme characteristics. So there's a lot of misogynist type critiques out there saying she's famous for nothing, and because the feminine side of life is typically not valued, right? When you think of housewives, if you have any ancestors who were housewives, or maybe your mom was a housewife, and you think about all the things that they do for you in fulfilling that gender role. Now, I'm not saying that every woman who stays at home is the same and they're all this cookie cutter person that is just doting and motherly, but I'm saying if you think of housewives and how they weren't recognized for their labor, then you can see how critiques of the feminine that are rooted in misogyny can play out in a critique of Kim Kardashian and her business decisions. And also, many people with strong Lilith placements can have unconventional relationships, but it depends on where Lilith is placed, and Lilith can reveal what type of lover we fear most, and in interacting with that lover in particular, they can drive us to despair, depending on how we interact. So if you have Lilith conjunct, like if you have Lilith conjunct somebody else's Lilith, you can do the same things to each other that you fear and be in a position of despair. And the light side of that is you guys understand each other so much, and that's why your Lilith is conjunct, especially if it's in the same sign. But also, sometimes somebody's Lilith is conjunct in one of your houses, and they can just be so vexing to you, and there's stuff that you have to work through with that type of a placement. Now, I will share that since New Year's Eve, I've been thinking about the Maury lie detector meme. If you're not familiar with this, maybe you could Google it. Maury, the talk show host, really growing up with television in the 90s and early 2000s, Maury Povich was always on TV. And, he would always give the lie detector rate. You are not the father, right? Or you are the father. It's just still hilarious to me, the fanfare that would take place on these shows, kind of preying on people's fears, and it's just really interesting premise for a show. But when I think of the Maury lie detector meme, and I think of Lilith, and I think of this podcast in particular and preparing for it, I kept thinking of Maury sitting there, right? He's opening up the results of the lie detector test, and he's got his glasses down on his nose and he's peering over them, and he goes, "You said you never act basic and vindictive by dragging people out in public and then running away. The lie detector test determined that was a lie." Are you honest with yourself about your shadow side? Do you know where your shadow side is and what circumstances precipitated that shadow side? Maybe you carry it with you from a past life, or maybe it's even more accessible from childhood memories, or maybe you've repressed some childhood memories and it's not as accessible. But it's important that you do try to access Lilith. And there's a seductive pull to acting from karmic instinct, and in relationships we may act unconsciously in a variety of ways. So where we can examine Lilith is in our family legacy. What happened in your family? Not just your original family, right? Your mom and dad, but go back. And this is why I love the show, and maybe I mentioned it in a previous episode, but I love the show by Henry Louis Gates Jr. called Finding Your Roots. He also has a show, African American Lives, and that was prior to doing Finding Your Roots. It was kind of like the first gen series, and then prior to that, I think there was a show called American Lives, and then they're all kind of, in the same family. And then his most recent show on PBS was, I think, it was on Latin America, and then he has another miniseries on Africa. They're all so interesting. I love his work as a scholar because he realizes the importance of going back and seeing what our ancestors did and how that has carried over to our parents' parents, you know, and dealing with that. But he also does say you're not responsible for the actions of your ancestors. But that doesn't prevent, you know, somebody like Anderson Cooper from looking back and seeing, okay, one of his ancestors was a slave owner, and he found out that he was beaten to death by one of his slaves. And Anderson Cooper's response was, well, in that case, he probably deserved it in order to get beaten to death by somebody who, I mean, first of all, the issue is humans are not property, right? But, you know, looking back and saying, you know, what my ancestor did was not right. And you can say going forward, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to be different. I am different. I make a conscious effort to be my own person and not make those mistakes. So, to continue with this, my great-grandmother is still alive, and she just turned 94 in November. Yes, she's a Scorpio, and she's a double Scorpio, actually. She was born on November 12th, and she is a first-generation American. Her father came here from Russia, and her mother from Amsterdam. And some family was already here out in Montana, and so her family lived out here on a farm. And if you look at the census records, you can see how many people actually lived in one house. And, you know, some of us can't really, you know, see what that must have been like. But a lot of times, you know, they would write to their family wherever their family was living in the world, and they would say, okay, well, you know, we've got this little plot of land, why don't you come and you can live here. And you know, to me, as somebody who's looked through my ancestry pretty closely at this point, I know that there are also some things that are not reported and unsaid. You know, I wonder to myself, well, what part did my family have in the Indian-American War? Because they did come back here, they did come over here post-slavery, but, you know, them living in Montana and South Dakota and these places, what role did they play in all of this? And on my other side of the family, I learned that there is some indigenous ancestry as well, located, you know, coming down from Canada. But, you know, it does make you wonder, and that's partially what I'm thinking about with family secrets. You know, I doubt anyone is going to pass on whether or not they participated in that. And so I don't think I'll be able to know unless, you know, I have a Harvard researcher like Henry Louis Gates Jr. looking out for me and learning my stuff, but I really doubt it. So it's really as much research as I can do on my own. And it's also being conscientious about that and American history and admitting that, yes, that did really happen. You know, in America, that was something that went on here. So, again, some family was already here in Montana, and they lived on a farm. And I'm just learning these details because her daughter, who's my grandmother, Charlotte, was not in my life. I met her twice. She left my mother when my mother was about 13, and she ended up living in Florida with her new husband, and she had multiple sclerosis. And I'm telling you this so you understand that the family was split up, and I didn't spend time with my great-grandmother, Edith, even though she lived nearby. I knew where she lived because I went there a few times as a kid when my cousins and aunt and uncle, you know, were living with her for a while, but I never really spent any time with her, and I thought it was important to get to know her. So I found her phone number. I looked her phone number up online, and I drove past her, row house on this street that was kind of off a main drag, and I kind of knew where it was. And I decided to set up a meeting with her. And the first time I talked to her on the phone, I think what was interesting to me is she kind of expected me to be angry with her. She said, I told her who I was, and, she said, oh, you're, my mom's daughter, and she said, what a family we have, kind of like sad, and implying that she hasn't really done a great job in keeping in touch. And so we talked for a little while, and she really wanted to share with me during our first couple of meetings that she was raped by her sister's husband. And this was when she was, 14 or 15. And she told me she prayed every night to get as far away from home as she could. And she used to be taunted by her brother-in-law. He used to, when he would see her privately, he would say, you shouldn't tell anybody because nobody's going to believe you anyway. And, it happened to her more than once. And so when she turned 17 and she met this guy for the first time, and after a few meetings back and forth, they decided they should get married. That was just seen as an out for her. And so she ended up marrying him, and she felt like, oh, this is the answer to my prayers. I'm going to be able to get away from here. I never have to see my brother-in-law again. And she took that opportunity and started her life, and here I am, right, because of that union. But before that, she had a really nice friend. She still keeps a few mementos of him, and she's 94 years old, and this is from when she was a teenager. But because he was, and this is, legacy of American racism, because he was indigenous, because he was Native American, she wasn't allowed to see him. So she had to sneak around and see him. But his name was Jackie, and she still talks about him, and you should see her face. She just smiles, and you can tell it's just this radiating smile. It's beautiful. She just really cared about this person and wanted to be with him, but because she was a teenager and she had limited options, she wasn't able to do that. But so she did marry my great-grandfather, Benny, and Benny is also the son of immigrants, first-generation American, and he was serving in the military, and that's how he ended up out in her neck of the woods. But he was from New York City, that's where they settled. And so my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather moved back east, and so she did get away from her family, and they lived in a variety of places in New York City. They lived in Greenpoint, and they lived in Manhattan, and my great-grandmother talked about the variety of odd jobs that my great-grandfather took to keep them afloat. He was once a building supervisor, and he bussed tables, and he did a whole bunch of stuff. However, he was also a philanderer, so a lot of times he didn't come home. He would stay out, and then she ended up having her first child, and he wasn't home a lot. And she actually told me that I might have cousins, other families that I don't know about, that we don't know about. She's pretty sure, she said. So I told you my grandmother had multiple sclerosis, and what we found out from my great-grandmother is that she was bitten by a cockroach when she was I know, sorry, that's very, cringeworthy. So she was bitten by a cockroach, and she became very ill. And cockroaches can carry a variety of illnesses. And so this is something that Charlotte experienced that I learned more about by knowing Edith. And I learned a lot more about my family, but it was just really helpful because one of the reasons I feel attracted to Lilith and the reason I got the Lilith tattoo in the last few years is learning about things that happened in your family that were heavy. I'm not going to reveal everything that happened in my family for the purposes of this podcast, but just a little bit so that you think about your own family history and how you can take darkness, and I'm reticent to call it darkness, we'll say shadow. How you can take shadow in your life and you can change it, and you can change it into something good. You can change it into something salient and creative and imaginative and uplifting. I strongly believe that. And so the stories of my ancestors I use as getting an idea of history, of where I come from, of women's lives through the generations, and what my place is in that. So learning about that and then thinking about how this was repeated generation after generation in certain ways, the history of sexual abuse, the burden of that, which is hugely emotional and socio-political. So, in every generation, there was a fear of motherhood, and there was a crossroads, am I going to embrace motherhood or am I going to reject it? And that's part of my, issues as a person with Lilith and Cancer, is dealing with that figure in my life, dealing with the maternity in the generations and how it played out and how people are not perfect and they make mistakes, and you have to transmute that. You have to transmute mistakes of people who you have no control over into something imaginative and, again, salient and good for the world, into love. So since I'm a generation removed, a few generations removed from Edith and a generation removed from Charlotte, I can empathize with them, maybe more than somebody who was closer to it, like my mother, although she's done a great job of coming to terms with it as well. But I understand both of them, and I love both of them. And so why am I telling you all of this? My shadow and your shadow is tied up with these generations of family. My reactions and your reactions are based off of what signatures we've picked up from our family and how we can analyze those, how we can feel into them. This is Black Pudding Poetry with Perfect Like You.
I am perfect just like you. In every way, yes, it's true. I'm perfect just like you. Whatever you say or do, I'm amazing. I can do almost anything. I'm amazing. I can fly forward and sing. I am perfect just like you. every way, yes, it's true. I'm perfect just like you. Whatever you say or do, I'm beautiful. I got everything in place. I'm beautiful. My tits and my ass are not in my face.
Speaking of transmutation through your ancestors, my great-grandmother shared with me that she had always been spiritual and she liked to use her intuition, and she wished that somebody in the family would carry on her tradition of spirituality. And what kind of spirituality was that? You know, that would probably be your question, right? Was she religious but no, she actually was very just spiritual. When somebody says, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, well, that was her. While she did own a copy of the Bible, she said she did read her Bible, but I think that was just part of her spiritual practice. She didn't go to church, really. She was suspicious of churches, just like my grandmother on my other side of the family. And as many people are suspicious of church organizations, because it's just humans, right? So you can have your spiritual practice in the privacy of your own home. And so that's what she chose to do. And part of her spiritual practice was intuiting things, trusting herself, and learning about, witnessing serendipity and synchronicity and all that kind of stuff, forgiveness, love, these types of things that come with spirituality. And she just said she wished that somebody in her family would carry it on. And this was right after I had received a string of psychic readings where the psychics had told me, look, you need to really shift your focus from what you're doing now, which, I feel like was pretty grounded, worldly type of academic stuff. You need to shift it to the spiritual. That's part of your life purpose, and you're not doing that right now. And I took that very seriously because I had given up my spiritual practices because, and that's the esoteric feminine that has been suppressed forever. When we talk about Lilith, we're talking about a myth in Judaism where Lilith was considered a demon because she was the first woman created in a deleted myth of Judaism. And, she wanted to be, this is going to sound so basic and stupid, she wanted to be on top during sex. And Adam was like, no, I don't want you to be on top. I want to be on top. And they got in a fight, and basically the story goes that she either was banished or banished herself, and she spawned a bunch of demon children. And so she's, the archetype of the, what would you say, deadbeat mother or, negligent mother, right? Because her children became demons. But how else can we look at this? Is that we see a woman who was rejected because she wanted to be assertive, and then she had children who would be considered, out of control. But were they really? So, in the myth, obviously, the children being demons, they're going to display all of these qualities that seem like, like just thinking of Maury, thinking of my talk show chat earlier in the podcast, think of the people that go on to Maury or Jerry Springer, these types of exhibitionist shows where it's just encouraged that they bring out the parts of themselves that are very catty, petty, and get into fights, encouraged to pull each other's hair and escalate things. But is that really their fault when they go on the show? I mean, obviously, yeah, they have some will, right? But they want to go on the show because, either to clear up something, or it's like, hey, I'm on Jerry Springer. This is kind of cool. I can just be my basest self. So anyway, I'm just trying to get you to think about demons. What are demons? What are people? Who are people who have gone through bullshit, basically, and then they become people who are considered demons? But what have they gone through in their lives? What kind of trauma? What kind of, psychological changes have taken place because of what they've experienced? And also in the tale of Judaism, it was implied that Lilith was evil because she decided to be a single mother, and there are different retellings of the tale. But then we have the follow-up, which was, I'm going to read the tale later in the podcast, but we have the follow-up tale, which was that there was Eve, right? Because Eve now in Christianity is considered the first woman who was made out of the rib of man, and she was there to be subservient to him. But technically there was Lilith, and then there was one that was like a mistake or something, or was eliminated or was left running around. And then there was Eve after that, and then she was created to be subservient, which did not work out because, Satan, and, the archetype of Satan or the devil was like, hey, you could be living on your own terms, but you're here following this Adam guy when I can give you knowledge. And then Eve decides to take that route, and then we have, the creation of the rest of humanity. So the myth is interesting when you look at it from a different angle that doesn't believe in the superstitious aspects of it, that takes a advanced psychological portrait of what's going on, that looks at the archetype in a new way. And so the Lilith that most astrologers are talking about is the dark apogee of the moon, and the tale is that there are multiple parts of Lilith associated with her age progressions. And so if you look at your chart and you take a close inventory of your life, you're going to be able to see, and actually astrologers can see this from just the degree that Lilith is at in your chart, but you'll be able to see, okay, am I young Lilith who needs to deal with a lot of this shadow stuff and is wreaking havoc? Am I middle ground Lilith who is starting to evolve and realize that they can't live with all of this treachery, so to speak? Or am I advanced Lilith who is working with the ancestral baggage and trying to transmute it into something better for everyone, for not just my family and myself, but for others? So there's the different manifestations of Black Moon Lilith and the different manifestations of Lilith in your life. So not to brag, obviously I'm saying that just to be silly, because obviously I'm going to say my Lilith is at 26 degrees, which happens to be a decent degree, but I do see that reflected in my life, because I see the way that I've dealt with the stuff in my family and tried to make it a better situation. And so I can see where my Lilith would be more evolved. And so, looking at the rest of my chart, I've got stuff I've got to work on too, but I'm just saying 26 degree of Lilith tells me that I still have a little more to go, right? It's not at the anoretic degree, or it's not at the 28th degree, but the 26th degree is a pretty good degree, pretty good indication that I'm going to take the stuff that has happened and make it into something that is, for the greater good. Demetra George has a good quote about Lilith, and here it is. It's so succinct. The asteroid Lilith describes the first stage in the mythical journey where Lilith is suppressed, humiliated, and flees in a fiery rage to the desolate wilderness. The dark moon Lilith depicts the pain of her exile where she plots and executes revenge. The black moon Lilith shows how she transmutes her distorted image back to its natural healthy expression. So this would follow where we're at right now. I would say that in the world we're trying to get to a natural expression of Lilith without the shame and changing the rage into leadership. Changing that, deciding to, revenge in secret can only take you so far. People are deciding everything I wish to be in this world is out in the open, and I'm not going to apologize for wanting to be a leader. I'm not going to apologize for wanting my say in wherever it may be, the home, the workplace, just publicly in general, right? Women have been in the sphere of the private a lot, or they're expected to stay in the sphere of the private. All of their concerns and stuff are supposed to stay private. I'm talking about women, but also femmes, gender non-binary people. They're there too, and they need that recognition, and they need to show, hey, I don't see myself as bad anymore. I don't take that energy that society is trying to shove on me, and I don't take the shame, and that doesn't exist for me anymore, because I see through it, and I see that all it's trying to do is put me in this place where I don't have power, because that's what this is all about, and that's ultimately what Lilith is in her greatest expression, is power, is somebody who has experienced rejection based on their own natural expression, and that now they're trying to get their power back. So Lilith, I would say, represents power. Now, Lilith, I would consider, and I've read this too in a few really good articles, one on the Hood Witch. So the reason I like the article on the Hood Witch is because it tries to do this reclamation of the stories from the ancient times and today, what we can glean from the story using our knowledge now and working from our socio-political perspective currently. So Lilith is a pleasure activist, right? So if you think of the original story where Lilith wanted to be on top, right? It was very basic. Lilith is, wants to feel good and feels like, okay, you get to feel good, I should feel good too, So for survival, sometimes we deny what it is that makes us feel good because we think we have to. But, life isn't just, you don't have to wake up and say, well, in order to appreciate life, I need to seek feeling bad because, I don't know, it just seems like a pattern for some people. This is Shilpa Ray with You're Fucking No One.
In 1983, I saw you naked on the street, laid out in criminal graffiti. So are you now posing
so differently to me, in disguise of a billion Dwayne Reed. Police taped and caged, perennial scaffolding, buildings like prison bars, made to look sexy. $1 million lives, products of prosperity, or just a concrete mess, ripping at the seams. Hell, I'm still a table flipper, I'm throwing punches in the dark. So keep your stuck-up hoes a coming to this cupcake mahal. You can make me count your blocks up, you can change the way I walk up, change the speed of how I talk, but you can't always get me on. Hell, I've got a famous fever, I love to shout loud in the dark. So keep your stuck-up hoes a coming, 'cause I know what you really are. Shove me out to places far, away from the amusement park. Change your friends all you want, 'cause you can't always get me off. You burn me out, you burn me out. 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 You burn me out. You burn me out. You burn me out. You burn me out.
I knew this was going to be my longest episode so far, and I also know people can lose interest after about an hour has passed by, but I also know that my small group of listeners that I am so grateful for have told me that they prefer to listen at night because it's a nice, calming podcast. Another listener told me they like to listen while they make art. Actually, a few listeners said that, and well, I don't have that many listeners, so the feedback I've received has been very helpful. And so I thought, Lilith is probably astrologically and mythically, I guess, one of the most misunderstood placements in a chart and stories. And so I knew with this show, I was going to have to conversationally go into some of my ancestral line, which I did first. That's such an Aquarius thing to say. First, I knew I was going to conversationally have to approach this. And I'm Aquariusing. And so if you listen back on the show or think about what you've listened to so far, my approach has been to introduce you to the real life practical application for one person, which is me, and then to get your feet wet in the myth a little bit, and then to full on immerse you in the myth of Lilith and how different people have interpreted it and how each tradition was different. And so because Lilith is misunderstood, I feel as though we need to talk about how her energy is that of disruption. And we talked about that with the Demetra George quote. Lilith and sexuality is also an important correlation because women are told to hide their sexuality. Or very conservative people. Also, you could see in very conservative sects, you'll find out that this person is actually gay, but they've hid themselves, and now they've kept all these secrets for generations because they've been repressed and their sexuality has been, they were told at one point, your sexuality is something that is bad and you need to hide it. And that goes for, it really has to do with femme and masc more than man or woman, right? So we'll just go from that point. But in early Judaism, rabbis also assigned Lilith a bunch of unfavorable associations and, for instance, abortion, growing long hair, sitting down to pee, which is weird. Nocturnal emissions also were Lilith. And, again, I want to mention the pleasure activist thing. And also something to remember about Lilith is she can be invoked for protection. And in Judaism, incantation bowls were buried upside down in houses to trap demons and protect the home. And so when they did that, they would paint the bowls with Lilith. And curiously, Lilith was later taken by the I shouldn't say curiously because that's not really, cultures appropriate other cultures and then it becomes harder to trace where they come from. But Greco-Roman culture, Lilith was a vampiric demon and, associated with magic and witchcraft. And so anyway, so Lilith in your chart will be a place where you like to disrupt or provoke. And you should call on the energy of Lilith when you want to spice things up. And people who have a big sense of humor will sometimes have a strong Lilith. And so one person in particular I'm thinking of is Joan Rivers. And, whatever you think of Joan Rivers, she was sharp. She was just very quick. And I'm not a big fan of her humor of dragging people and stuff. But she, she had her moments where she was funny and I appreciate what she did for comedy and how she put herself out there. And also, I want to mention again, the creativity of Lilith. How many times have you had to use some kind of rage, harness that rage to create something gorgeous? And in the avant-garde, a lot of avant-garde people like Pablo Picasso and Stanley Kubrick and Kanye West, right? Think about Kanye West music. I mentioned him 20 times on the show already. But Lilith is strong in their charts. And actually, there's this article I just read about a conjunction between Kanye West, Kourtney Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, Kim Kardashian, and Kris Kardashian. They all have a Lilith conjunction. And I find that fascinating. Also, Albert Einstein and Malcolm X had a strong Lilith placement. But, something else is that Lilith can make you more connected with Neptune and kind of give you visions and this type of stuff. Lilith, also, you have to think about sexuality when you think about Lilith. Again, and to underscore this, Rita Hayworth and Nicki Minaj also have a strong placement of Lilith, and also Marilyn Monroe had a strong Lilith placement. But you see how the negative side of Lilith, or the challenging side of Lilith, I would say Marilyn Monroe was probably at the intermediate level of Lilith, because she was trying to transmute the energy of, I know Marilyn Monroe was actually sexually abused, and then she tried to take that energy and turn herself into somebody new, right? She changed her name from Norma Jean to Marilyn Monroe. She becomes so popular. She's seen as the sex symbol. She's making her way in the world. But what does she feel? She feels lonely, and she ends up feeling like beauty is a scam, right? Towards the end of her life, she ends up feeling like she was, she was so smart, but she ended up feeling like that didn't matter because of what she looked like and the sex symbol thing. Because in our society, a lot of times, as we see with Kim Kardashian, right, it's not integrated. You can't be a sex symbol and be extremely smart in some people's minds. And also, when we think about queer icons, a lot of queer icons have very strong, unapologetic Lilith placements, right? And also in relationships, I talked about this a little bit, but when you have a conjunction with somebody in Lilith, the feelings are intense. And I feel like Lilith sometimes demonstrates a past life connection. And some people, we should talk about this, interpret Lilith and Adam's interaction as Lilith wanted, and now this is where we get into rape culture. So Lilith wanted to have power and be on top, and Adam instead, this is one retelling of the tale, wanted her to be submissive and basically ended up raping her. And this is how she turned into the demon, right? Or what people have said is a demon, when really, as with all mental illness, it's a very normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. And so when Adam raped her or tried to rape her, whatever telling of the tale you want to believe, Lilith said the name of God, and that was at the time, in the tale, not to be spoken. And when she spoke the name, she became empowered, and she grew wings, and she flew away, and she lived in a cave, right? And this is, so again, the evolution of Lilith. Lilith can be a struggle for people who are femmes having power and what they do with that. And there are many issues in my own life where I've said, this really comes down to people not wanting me to have any power. And meanwhile, you look at these situations, sometimes you have blinders on and you're like, well, maybe, you think people are being good-natured, I guess, and you have to get down to the point where you feel like, I'm going to decide whether or not this is good-natured. And that has a lot to do with whether or not I believe that somebody is trying to make me feel powerless. And I think there's a dark side to power as well, but only if your intentions are good. So if you're walking around here, having good intentions, and then somebody's trying to question your power, you have to wonder, who's got the bad intentions here, me or you? And you have the answer to that. So we've also got to talk more about the idea of rape, and especially with the Me Too movement. And we have to realize that this is not a new movement. And fortunately for us, there are always actors who are pulling this issue to the fore. And Viola Davis expressed really well in her speech at the second Women's March that just occurred that there are women who are still in the shadows who cannot come forward because there are a lot of implications for coming forward. People who come forward with rape allegations benefit nothing from coming forward with them. It's just a burden. And basically what they're doing is sacrifice. And they're saying, look, there's something else more important than me. And if I die today, even if I've gone through hell, it will be worth it so that somebody else doesn't abuse their power and rape someone else. So when somebody comes forward, I would say that is definitely tied to Lilith energy, because it's disruptive in the best way, because you're saying, look, I'm not only going to take my power, I'm going to show other people how to take theirs. And so it has to do with power imbalances. And I'm also going to read you the story of Lilith from the Sumerian legend. So perhaps you're settling into bed and this will be your bedtime story. But this is a translation from the ancient Sumerian legend of Lilith as goddess, and she's actually called Lilithu in Sumerian. But Lilith is an agricultural fertility goddess, and her myth is found in over 100 different religions and has numerous variations on the name. And interestingly, Lilith and Lolita are two of the other translations, right? If we think about Vladimir Nabokov's story, that's also very interesting, right? We talk about like victim blaming and things like that in Lolita, right? With the nymph, So here it is, and I'm going to read it to you. Before the stars were born, before people built great cities, the great mountain Atlin shook and bled fiery blood as it gave birth to Lilithu. The land all around burned, many animals and people died. When Lilithu opened her eyes, Lilithu saw the ashes of her birth and wept tears like rain. Lilithu's tears became rivers and streams, flowers grew where Lilithu walked, trees grew where Lilithu sat, the ashes became fertile soil, and an orchard became Lilithu's home. In Lilithu's orchard, many animals are people who came to live in paradise. Lilithu gave them grain and taught them to harvest. Lilithu made bread and beer. The people rejoiced, ate, drank. One day a great prince came to the land of Atlin. He spied Lilithu and wooed her, but Lilithu spurned and rejected him. The great prince became very angry. He spied 2 lions and killed them both. Lilithu wept for the lions. She cradled their heads in her arms. The lions awoke to her tears. The lions licked away her tears and became strong. They became Lilithu's loyal friends. The great prince saw this, and again he wooed Lilithu, but Lilithu became a bird. She flew away from him. Angry, the prince began hunting birds. Lilithu saw this and was upset. To spite the prince, she spat at him and mated with a serpent. Lilithu gave birth very quickly. Her child was like no other. The child had 6 arms. The child had a serpent's tail. The child was very strong. Lilithu called the child a Merilithu. The Merilithu attacked the great prince. The great prince and the Merilithu fought the day and night, for night after night and day after day, but neither could win the fight. Lilithu saw this and mated again. Another Merilithu was born, and another and another. 216 were born. In fear, the great prince ran away. The people of the orchard rejoiced. The Merilithus farmed the land. The Merilithus protected the people. But the great prince swore vengeance. He cursed the mountain Atlin and its land. Atlin became angry at this curse. The mountain and the land shook. Atlin shook and bled and cried. Its fiery blood made fires, and its tears made floods. Afraid, Lilithu turned into a great bird. She grasped people in her feet and carried animals on her back. The Merilithus and the lions carried people too. Together they fled the land of Atlin. Lilithu went west and east. Lilithu went north and south. Finally, she came to dry land. The people thanked Lilithu greatly. The people built statues in her honor. Lilithu wept for her lost home. Her tears formed 2 rivers. The rivers joined together. They flowed into the ocean. The people grew grain by the river. The people grew great orchards. They built buildings and towers of stones. The people grew healthy and the land rich. Merchants from far places traveled there. News of the wealth and land grew. The great prince heard of the land. He sent his heralds to inquire of its lady, but Lilithu fed his heralds to her lions. The great prince sent an army, but the Merilithus destroyed his army. Finally, the great prince went when he saw the beautiful orchards, When he saw the 6 armed Merilitus, the great prince knew the lady was Lilitu. In fear, he disguised himself as a woman. The great prince went to Lilitu's temple. He disguised and fooled the people, but the lions knew his scent. The 2 lions warned Lilitu, so Lilitu prepared a trap. Lilitu summoned 36 young men. She filled a hall with 36 silver platters. She ordered 36 beasts slaughtered. At last, she was ready. She invited the people to feast. People came from all over the land. The great prince came too. The great prince arrived in disguise, but Lilitu knew him eagerly. She welcomed him as an honored guest. The great prince accepted her hospitality. He sat before all the people. The 36 young men were brought forth. "Please, choose a man," Lilitu commanded. Not wanting to be rude, the great prince chose one. Lilitu bade the great prince to sit beside the young man. The silver platters were brought forth. The people feasted on the meat of 36 beasts. Great gifts were brought forth. Lilitu gave the gifts to the great prince. Confused, the great prince accepted. Then the feast was finally over. Curious, the great prince questioned Lilitu, "Do you always give such grand gifts to strangers?" "Only when someone is married," Lilitu answered. Realizing what had happened, the great prince became angry. He ripped off his disguise. He drew his sword and his dagger. "Why have you made me marry this man?" he demanded. "Because you can never marry me," Lilitu answered. Enraged, the great prince attacked Lilitu. The 2 fought endlessly, for Lilitu was very strong. Whenever the prince would get too bold, Lilitu would change into a bird. The great prince fell to the ground and wept in despair. The great prince professed his love. He promised that he would never quit. He was prepared to cut his own throat. Finally, Lilitu grew tired of this game. She felt pity for the great prince. "I will grant you 1 kiss," Lilitu declared. Desperate, the great prince accepted. The moment the great prince his kiss had been dealt, his body flooded with life and then death. So great was the pleasure of the kiss that he died. Lilitu wept for the great prince, but the great prince remained dead. Saddened, Lilitu knew she could never love. No mortal man could taste her kiss and live. Her tears brought life, but her kiss brought death. This is Deaf Manic with Inner Universe.
Supposed to stay around. Ain't it fair that you got me stuck in this predicament? I'm just so caught up with you. Second time I play the fool. Sick of running around for you, but somehow you draw me closer. Why I chose to fill this void with you, I don't know. I'll never leave, let me see you fall as we ride around. And you lost your soul while you quieting down. Lay my head down as I rest, lay my head down as I rest. Come back now with the stress, come back now with the stress. Sorry that I ever had you vexed.
What the fuck with the crisis? Giving it back with my vices, correcting my own sacrifices, feeling a snap when I'm the nicest. Goddamn, what am I doing? I pray to God that I just keep pursuing. Unnecessary, but it's uncomfortable. I'm sorry that I gotta put you through, but why do I not love you anymore? Why do I hide when you're at the store? Why am I mad at the overthought? Think about you when you're on the floor. Man, I really gotta get it back though. Put the charm away and I regret those silly little things that I did for you. Neglecting those things is an obstacle. My mind's eclectic with the introspective thoughts of you from this ill perspective, giving you the rush that you're hoping for. But why am I here when I'm just craving more?
I'm sorry, I will fight it. We go back and rewrite it. Yeah, we go back and rewrite it. I'm sorry, I will fight it. We go back and rewrite it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I will fight it. And we go back and rewrite it. Goddamn.
I was part of this thing with you. Started changing on me what I do. I don't feel like I'm really loving you, but let's just stay far apart.
So how do we represent the evolved Lilith? Well, Lilith boldly instructs us to stand up for what we believe in, unbridled and courageous, no matter what the cost. Her mantra is equality. An affirmation of Lilith is, I forgive. I welcome forgiveness. I am free from judgment. I deserve to be free from guilt. I am creating the life I love. I am tolerant of unenlightened people. My vital energy resurfaces naturally. I am honest and truthful in all I say and do. Gemstones associated with Lilith are amber, tiger's eye, garnet, bloodstone, tourmaline, smoky quartz. Her symbols are a crossroads, an owl, serpent, and the dark moon. She's associated with wind, storms, and the astrological sign of Scorpio. Her card in the Goddess Oracle by Amy Sophia tells us, I dance my life for myself. I am whole, I am complete. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I dance the dark and the light, the conscious and the unconscious, the sane and the insane, and I speak from myself authentically with total conviction, without regard for how I might look. All the parts of myself flow into the whole. All my divergent selves unite as one. I listen to what needs to be heard. I never make excuses. I feel my feelings deeply and profoundly. I never hide. I live my sexuality to please myself and pleasure others. I express it as it needs to be expressed, from the core of myself, from the wholeness of my dance. I am female. I am sexual. I am power. I was greatly feared. The meaning behind the card is to tell you to take back your power. Where are the places you have lost or give away your power? What beliefs do you hold that deny you your power? Have you been told that powerful women never find mates, or that women can't have power because that would make them unfeminine? Have you been teased, shunned, ostracized by other people when you've stepped into your power? Are you afraid of misusing your power to dominate or manipulate? Lilith says that the way to wholeness for you now is in acknowledging that you're not connecting with your power, and then second, coming to terms with accepting your power. To call on Lilith, take a Lilith gem of your choice, reflect on her statement written above. While holding it in your hand, repeat the affirmations associated with her and invite Lilith into your life. Carry the stone with you and infuse your life with feminine power and abilities. This goes for every person, whether you are representing yourself, or whether you've incarnated as a man or a woman, whether you are masc or femme. Just because someone's born a man doesn't mean they can't somehow not have power or give up their power unjustly. This can happen, especially if you're a femme. So one thing that I would like to add here is that I have not yet come across this in all my research, but I see this association in myself. I see her as a protector of any woman who has been in or is in an abusive relationship or has been dominated by a partner. This is what I see that's not represented by depictions I've seen. She's a symbol of our free will, and we can call on her for assistance when we no longer find our strength on our own. With Lilith, we grow our wings and we find our freedom and our strength and independence to become free from fear. This is Wayfairy with Not Your Fault.
Some kind of rejection keeps playing in my head. I try to close my eyes and jerks me awake again. His body is faceless, his touch too familiar. This man of my nightmares has visited before. And you wonder why I'm angry all the time. Each time my phone rings, tears flow through the line. Everyone I know has nightmares, and most of them have faces. I wake up to a call from my sister. He's visited her alone in her room. He closes the door. He doesn't ask, so she doesn't say no. Each touch is a knife, but she's too scared to say so. He doesn't ask, so she doesn't say no. Wonder why I'm angry all the time. Each time my phone rings, tears flow through the line. And everyone I know has nightmares, and most of them have faces. It's not your fault, 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 it's not your fault,
Offerings to Lilith may include frankincense, jam, tea, baby dolls, and images of animals. Lilith has become a demoness, finding herself feared and loathed by people who considered her to be evil. She's even been depicted as murdering babies and murdering mothers during childbirth. The association of Lilith with child murdering basically stems from a Judaic interpretation of her myth, a myth of actually a different demon, Abizu, and this tradition comes from Europe, and she was allegedly responsible for miscarriages and infant mortality, and she can also be depicted as Satan, the serpent responsible for tempting Eve or telling Eve, hey, there's another type of life. So with Lilith, we have to see all the different incarnations, the mythological sources, the Babylonian, Christian, Judaic, occult, and Kabbalistic traditions, all fire and water signs. Aquarius is Lilith the elder, so the more evolved Lilith, and Leo is Lilith the younger. Planets representing Lilith are the moon, the sun as Lilith the younger, and Saturn as Lilith the elder. The elements of Lilith would be all the elements, but it would represent her different ages. And her colors would be indigo, which would be in the tradition of Kabbalah, amber, which would be her younger color, a bluish mauve would be Lilith the elder. Her sense would be sight, musical key is C. And most of all, we have to take into consideration her powers. Her powers are seeing through illusions, women's mysteries, protection of women and children, especially infants. Sexuality, sex magic, boldness, independence, discernment, self-esteem, justice, ending gossip, reconciliation, slander, inspiration, divination, acquisition of wealth, attaining fame, black magic, right? Astrology, necromancy, pyromancy, and transforming dark energy into usable energy. Removing curses of auric attachments, spiritual healing. This is Maikah Beats featuring Rachel with Ending. Take care, listeners.